Okay, welcome back to LAMBDA Man Training. This is part 3 of 4 parts. So far, this course, the title is Would the Real LAMBDA Man Please Stand Up? Part 1, we reviewed the problem with men nowadays, and how we are simply confused, lonely, isolated, and we are causing major problems in society. Part 2, we dug into our past, and we tried to understand the concept of how our past controls our future in a very peculiar way, and unless we deal with our past, it's going to continue to control us and control our actions in that peculiar way, which is usually not how we'd like to behave, and we can't fix our problems. Alright, so this is part 3 of 4. This is, in this section, we're going to discuss the definition of a man. We're going to look at the historical roots of the definition of manhood. There will be a video for a good portion of it, and I have received several compliments on this particular portion of the video. Obviously, getting real and in touch with our past is a very emotionally touching type of topic. But this segment, the definition of a man, and the video that I will play, will present to you the history of manhood and give you some facts and data and statistics that you have never ever heard of. And it will be very impactful on you, as it was myself and as it has been to other people. And I'd like to start this section off with a quote, and then we'll come back to it after the video. When you find your authentic vision of manhood, you find your purpose, and you find your peace. Enjoy the video.
History holds a lot of these answers. There are some key events and movements over the last 200 years or so that have contributed to our current state of confusion. Naturally, some of these events have impacted some of us more than others, and different cultures have experienced them differently. What are the historical roots of our crisis in manhood today? Let's take a look.
Racism, the evils of slavery, the caste system of the Jim Crow laws, and sustained prejudice even today have placed additional pressures on African American and other minority cultures. These unfortunate realities have contributed to a chain of events that oftentimes removed minority men from their homes, left young minority boys without male role models, limited growth and leadership opportunities for minority men, and created many other unfortunate challenges that have helped contribute to the current manhood crisis. Another dynamic that contributed arose when we shifted from an agrarian culture to an industrial culture. For many families up until that point, a young son would live the majority of his life next to dad. There was a great chance that dad worked in the fields behind the house. His son would see and be around his dad in the best hours of his day throughout all 4 seasons of the year. He would observe firsthand dad's work ethic, his creativity, his problem solving, and his leadership. In the wake of the Industrial Revolution, the norm for dad changed. Instead of working out of his home with his son tagging along, he would get up early, commute to work, work an 8 to 10 hour day, then come home later that evening. All he had left for his wife and kids were a few meager tidbits of himself. The leftovers. The Industrial Revolution helped set in motion the idea that raising kids was woman's work. A man's job was only to go to work and put a roof over his family's head and food on the table. Somehow men are supposed to be okay with this minimal, non-connected existence. As a result, mom was forced to fill in for dad, and many boys grew up without dad being around, and therefore no male role model. He was taught almost everything by mom or other women in his life. These women were courageous and vital. However, it takes a man to call a boy to manhood. Then there was the negative impact of the war years on a generation of men. Many of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers were part of the greatest generation. They exchanged their youth for war, and the virtues they valued were sacrifice and duty. But many of those men who engaged in battle had trouble engaging emotionally with their families after those wars. Because of this lack of emotional engagement, many sons of war veterans felt their dads took their fathering lightly and were disconnected from them relationally. Unfortunately, it was true. The war had not only taken them away from their families, it had changed many of them. Upon their return, far too many knew only to focus on hard work or other escapes from their trauma. Many of them didn't connect emotionally with their families, and that lack of engagement impacted their children and grandchildren. Feminism came to life in the second half of the 20th century. It originally sought equality. That's a great thing because men and women are equal, but the feminist quest later turned to sameness. Some segments of the feminist movement basically said that there are no differences between men and women. That left many men unsure how to act, with a lack of clarity about their role as men. Some even raised the question of whether men have a role or uniqueness at all. Anyone brave enough to ask that question is often criticized. In a world of sameness, no one seems to know for sure what a man is, or if he is even necessary. Now we have a more recent phenomenon called extended adolescence. Too many of our young men are choosing not to grow up. Instead of transitioning to adulthood in their early 20s, many young men are delaying adulthood until their late 20s or even their early 30s. Instead of transitioning boys to men, our culture has created a third place between boy and man. Several books have even been written describing this phenomenon. One author calls these guys boys who shave, and another labels it guyland. This phenomenon has a number of our young men stuck in an extended adolescence. Guys who choose just to drift along in life and take no responsibility for themselves, much less anybody else. They are only focused on their own comfort and the next big thrill. They are flatlined on things that really do matter, like getting out of debt, seeking meaningful relationships, pursuing a job, providing for a family, and living with a mission, a cause that is bigger than themselves. These are boys who go to college or go into life and create their own guyland. They are no more socially mature or responsible at age 30 than they were in their teens. Somehow our culture gives them a free pass for an entire decade or more. These are the historical events and movements that have impacted manhood today. This is our history. This is our story, and all have helped contribute to a crisis in masculinity. Where will we go from here? How can we deal with and overcome these realities? What will your story be?
Well, looks like we have our work cut out for us, man. How are we going to overcome the effects of racism, the physical separation from dad caused by the Industrial Revolution, the emotional separation from dad caused by the war years, the push for sameness by some segments of the feminist movement, and the recent phenomenon of extended adolescence? We're going to need a compelling vision of manhood. We're going to need men calling boys out of boyhood and into authentic manhood. Are you ready for that journey? If you're ready to go, then you need to show up.
So back to the slideshow. I hope you enjoyed the video. I think most people will find it eye-opening. Most men have never been presented with a history of manhood before. I think some issues or some of the facts and arguments, I can understand how individuals might have take issue with some of them. But nonetheless, there is a history to men and manhood. Similarly, I will draw to your attention that around the country, there are women's studies departments all around the country where women, rightfully so, study the history of women, womanhood, setbacks, successes, and so forth. And women are very good at studying their own history, and I applaud them for that. On the other hand, men are very poor at studying their own history, understanding from where they came, where they are at now, doing an assessment of their strengths and weaknesses as men, and figuring out an authentic way to move forward. Men are very weak in that, and there are very few men's studies departments at major universities across the United States. And since men are making most of society's major decisions, we are the least educated or informed about ourselves. And you can see how we cause problems. All right. So, taking a look at the video and then discussing a little bit here. The video had noted that in agrarian society, we learned here that fathers used to work at home on the land. Notice that land is italicized. I'll refer you to your worksheets. Where they mentor the son each day during the best hours of the day. The son seeing firsthand dad's creativity, work ethic, and leadership. Then, of course, what happened is the Industrial Revolution arrived. And fathers, during the daylight hours, the best hours of the day, fathers were away from the home during the best hours of the day, and women were left at home to raise the children. And when dad returned home, all he had left over for the children were the table scraps. How many of you know all too well about table scraps? Maybe that's your wound. That's your scar. Big problem in the Asian American community. And so I draw your attention to this history, gentlemen, because if you'll note, it was always a man's job to raise his kids and to raise his son. Only when the Industrial Revolution came did young men have to stay at home with a woman, and did it become a woman's job to raise the son. And in that sense, it is our obligation, one could conclude, as men, to be raised by a man and to raise our own sons properly. Because it takes a man to call a boy to manhood. Let me repeat that. It takes a man to call a boy to manhood. And it's an obvious pattern, right? Fathers leave the home. In agrarian society, men raise the kids, right? Well, hold on. Obvious pattern. Fathers leave the home and they fail to raise their sons, leaving it for the first time ever to become women's work, as I just said. Then the modern feminist movement comes, God bless them, wonderful. And also goes the woman to work, leaving the children at home, alone. What the heck is that? And who is taking care of the kids? MTV. MTV. And that's how you get the MTV generation, is what they called it when I was growing up. Now they call it extended adolescence or guyland. But doesn't that make perfect sense? Industrial Revolution, right? Well, in agrarian society, men are at home with the kids on the farm, showing during the best hours of the day dad's creativity and problem-solving skills. Then men leave home during the Industrial Revolution and and then it becomes a woman's work to raise the kids. Then no one else is left at home. And, we have nannies or just grandma who, watches the children, but she's not really doing any parenting. She's just making sure the children don't set themselves on fire. What's really happening is the children are sitting at home watching TV and watching the Disney Channel or Nickelodeon or MTV, and then you get extended adolescence. That's an obvious pattern. That should be obvious to us. And accordingly, we have to try to stem the tide and not do that to our own children, and understand that we are essentially the victims of that. Now, let's put a twist on this. When we talk about men and boys, the definition of manhood, the history, I think we have addressed that. And you now know where the definition of manhood comes from. It's not working all day at a factory or at a job, coming home to leave your children with table scraps. You understand that now. Let us now take a twist on this and add in Asian American history to the definition of manhood. All right. With immigrant dad working 2 or 3 blue-collar jobs, our Asian mothers raised us as immigrant children, extreme students, and the hope for the family's economic mobility. Isn't that the history of Asian Americans, right? We come here, from immigrant cultures, usually for a better way of life, we toil in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 jobs, 20 of us living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, or whatever it may be, in a tenement housing place in New York City. And dad's at the jobs, and mom, Asian mom, raises the kids to be extreme students, to go to Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, wherever it may be. And that's the hope for the family's economic mobility. And in doing so, the Asian American male image became one centered around academics, emasculation, and weakness. You've seen this, the Long Duck Dong. When I was growing up, there was an Asian guy called Long Duck Dong. He was an Asian dork. If you've watched The Hangover, there's that comedian who always plays the weak, emasculated Asian guy. Many Asian Americans would say that he's not doing anything for our people and our image. And so that's what happened to Asian Americans in America. However, throughout the rich history of Asians in Asia, Asian men came from a culture steeped in honor, communal benevolence, and love of the arts and oneness with nature. That's what a man was in Asia. So, without a positive role model here, because the Asian fathers work in butcher shops and liquor stores and dry cleaners, and the Asian mom maybe has you in the back of the dry cleaners and you're stuck to the television set or whatever, doing Kumon and piano lessons all day, becoming an extreme student. And that's where we've been. And so we eventually did go to college, and we began to have a piece of the American pie and the American dream. And so let's take a look at how the 2nd and 3rd generation Asian Americans who went to college, pursued the American dream, assimilated, and how that affected those Asian Americans, 2nd and 3rd generation, college educated. Let's see how that affected their definition of manhood. So the 2nd and 3rd generation of Asian men try to find their own identity. They go to colleges, they start their own fraternities. If you did not know the demographic trends, our Asians only started getting into colleges in mass numbers in the 80s, right when Lambda Phi Epsilon was formed. We're part of that history. And in doing so, what did we do? We infiltrated the colleges, and we wanted our piece of the American dream. We wanted to be like Animal House, which we saw on MTV when mom and dad were at their 3 laundromat jobs, and MTV babysat us. And we wanted to go to college and do what we thought we should do at college, which is join or start a fraternity and drink beer and go to parties. That's exactly what we did. It is now, I would suggest to you, gentlemen, so out of hand that historically the Q Sci-Fi, or excuse me, I'm uneducated myself. This particular African American fraternity on the right, who always wear purple with camouflage and gold boots, are part of the rich tradition of African American stepping, where an African American fraternities and sororities have their own style and look of stepping. And if you study African American stepping, you'll know which style and look belongs to which African American fraternity or sorority. On the other hand, Asian Americans adopted that, tried to mimic it, and then did it incorrectly. Because here we have on the left an Asian American sorority copying the style of step of an African American fraternity. Well, number one, Asian Americans are not African Americans. I understand that they could step in tribute to African Americans, but I don't think they should do that in supplanting of their own authentic activity. Asian Greeks just step. We don't have something that we do first and then step a little to pay tribute to African Americans. That's not how it works. All Asian Americans just step. And we're doing it now to such a degree that we do it in a way that's, I would find it offensive if I was at African American fraternity. We're copying African American fraternities, not sororities. That doesn't even make any sense to me. All right, next. So this is a news clipping from December 12, 2013, where authorities investigate the New York college freshman fraternity ritual, and he died. I believe this was Rutgers. And so this is another example of us, not handling our manhood very well. Lambdas are falling prey to an inauthentic definition of manhood. The consumerism and mass media of our country really sets the tone of the popular culture. And that is sold to the American public through MTV, Disney Channel, and Nickelodeon, if you're young. Being a man now in America means driving a fancy car, having a big house, a model-like wife, a fancy suit, drink a lot of alcohol, sleep with a lot of women, and etc. You know where I'm going with this. You watch any TV commercial or magazine ad, it's not the guy who takes care of his aging parents, pays all his taxes, and spends quality time with his kids that are getting all the attention and glory and admiration of the girls on television or mass media. Instead, it's the guy who has the fancy car and all the power. So what we have here is steady men of fortitude are not celebrated in our culture. Instead, we've given way to men who are metrosexual, over-consumerized, and mainly are focused on themselves. And that's what is happening in our popular culture. And you can see it play out every day. You just look at TV, or you just look at the people around you. In some cases, for Asian Americans, they took this whole paradigm of, frat house, binge drinking, and so forth, and that inauthentic definition of manhood of, we could drink ourselves essentially to death, or toy with it and get right up against it. And we took it so far. That inauthentic behavior has had dire, dire consequences. This is the lawyer of Jack, I can't say his last name correctly, it starts with P, who died in Texas, and he's holding up pictures of our fraternity and what happened that night as they were mark-a-lotting Jack while he was actually deceased at the time, and they were mark-a-lotting him, and they did not know it. They thought they were playing a practical joke on him. but they were mark-a-lotting a dead corpse. And these are his own fraternity brothers, Lambda Phi Epsilon fraternity brothers. So in our society, the strong, discerning, nurturing man and image has given way to the image of the emasculated, materialistic man who is over-consumerized and disconnected. Without a compelling definition and vision of manhood, the free marketplace of ideas will set the vision for us, and men will settle for less out of life and out of themselves. The effect is that men will act like boys. They'll want the more fancy car than the next guy. They'll have an attitude of, what can I get now? I want more. I'm going to sacrifice tomorrow for today's instant pleasure. They will live as if money grew on trees and there were no consequences to their actions. Penny wise, pound foolish, living for today at the price of tomorrow. Who's going to pay that price of tomorrow? Probably that man's children. Men are built differently than women. We have unique strengths and weaknesses, and we need other men specifically to help us, to support us, to share in mutual problem-solving activities. Accordingly, we need specifically other men to help clarify what it means to be a man, to lift us up. We need to be connected to other men. We can't live life in isolation and all alone. Having a support network of other bros will help identify your blind spots. Can't see your blind spots, but your bro can see them for you. This will make your life journey richer. That's what makes Lambda Phi Epsilon so special. And this is nothing new, gentlemen. This is a 2002 article from the UC Santa Barbara paper, and you'll see there maybe second full paragraph from the bottom. It ends with my name as Jason Louie's lawyer. As far back as 2002, I was defending this fraternity from drugs and alcohol-related deaths. This is the case of Seng T. Fang, a female who got in together with some Santa Barbara bros in an apartment building where there are 4 apartments, all occupied by bros, and on the outside of the apartment building were our letters. Well, one night in one of the apartments, the 3 bros that lived in that apartment decided to have a couple girls over, including a female named Sen T. Fang, and they decided to do ecstasy. Well, when they all woke up the next morning, she didn't wake up, and she was deceased. And her family sued everyone, the university, the national fraternity, the local fraternity, the chancellor of that university. They sued everyone. And I had to defend them, our fraternity. This is yet again another example of inauthentic manhood. What those bros should have been doing is having a nice evening of socialization with a young lady and friends. They should have cut it off at 11 o'clock, because nothing good happens after 11, because they need to wake up early the next morning and pursue their noble purpose in life. And in doing so, they should have shown Seng T. Fang that that's what grown men do. They have a purpose for their lives, they enjoy themselves, but they turn in early to get a good night's sleep, because the next morning they're going to pursue their noble purpose in life, because they're about something. 2007, University of California at Irvine, Lambda Phi Epsilon experiences a death of a pledge, 2005. Another example of inauthentic manhood of our members. December 2013, this article comes out, wherein a San Francisco State brother passes from alcohol poisoning. Right after I created Lambda Man Training. So let's talk a little bit about the rat race. You know, men think that their wounds will be healed through consumer goods. In obtaining those goods, we strain to keep it all together. We suffocate. The stress weighs us down. Consumerism and extended adolescence will heal my wounds and make me a man. Do you all get this cycle? You know, we have these wounds and we don't process them, we stuff them down. The consumerism and the consumer-driven society of the United States tells us that if we buy a bigger, fancier, more expensive car, have a bigger house, more buxom wife, or sleep with more women, or whatever, that's going to make us happy, and it's going to solve all our problems, give us peace, give us happiness. But then what we do is we get on this train to work all day long, to go to extreme behavior, to support and buy all of those consumer goods, and to keep up that, you know, trophy wife or whatever. And then we spin out of control, and we lose ourselves. And we find out that none of that stuff, no matter how much you get of it, will never truly give you peace. That's called the rat race. And do you know anyone who has ever won the rat race? Has anyone really ever had so much money, so many women, so much power, and such an amazing, beautiful woman that it solved all their problems? I don't know anyone who's won the rat race. In 1854, Henry David Thoreau said, quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." End quote. We don't have to be overworked, isolated, alone. We have each other. We have other men that we can rely on. That's the blessing of being in Lambda Phi Epsilon. You have brothers that you can rely on and journey and deal with this problem together. You can do it together. We need men. We need our own role models, not one corporate America feeds us, but one we know to be true in our hearts of hearts, because it takes a man to lead a boy to manhood. We need a male role model that is in accordance with our Asian values, an authentic Asian role model, male role model, and that we know his values are intrinsically correct and eternal. That being the image of a lambda man, not consumer man. Let me repeat that. Our image and our perception of manhood should be one of lambda man, not consumer man. In the rat race, we strain to keep it all together, suffocating, the stress weighing us down. Meanwhile, we're missing our kids, our parents, our wives, our families. In Asian culture, these things were emphasized. Hard work, honor, family, humility, whatever benefited the community, having an honorable death or funeral. Asian culture did not emphasize work till you drop, sleep with as many women as you can, buy more stuff than you'll ever need, get a more prestigious job to impress other people, have more fancy stuff than your neighbor, and then die. All men die. Few men ever really live. William Wallace, Braveheart. I would suggest to you or challenge you, another way of saying that is, all men die. Few men ever really have the cojones to try to live. Asian Americans are good at making a living. They're not so good at making a life. Okay, gentlemen, I think I've given you something to think about. We've gone over the historical definition of a man and where it derives from. We've gone over how Asian Americans and their history play a role into the evolving definition of manhood. And we've come to understand that, you know, if we don't find an authentic, well, we have come to understand that The popular definition, the consumer definition of manhood is really to buy more stuff and have more bling bling, and that will help you solve all your problems, give you peace, and give you happiness. Therefore, you don't have to deal with your wounds. You don't have to deal with your junk. You can just buy more stuff and work more and ignore your loved ones more so you can pay for all that stuff. And we find ourselves on some sort of treadmill, the rat race, that you can never win. Instead, we could be leading a life of purpose. We could have a noble purpose for our life. We could be finding real peace, pursuing our real selves. Thus, if you recall when we started this segment, we started off with a quote. When you find your authentic vision of your manhood, you find your peace, you find your purpose, and you find your peace. This concludes segment 3.